Okay, so now let's have a look at actually connecting to the database. Because this for now is just dealing with the backend language and the server, but it's not actually storing this data anywhere. If you were to reload this page, it will give you a warning because you're basically deleting any inputs that you put, but then it will not actually store the items anywhere. As you can see, it's not showing the post items anymore. So it's for a real site, it's quite useless because you're not actually storing the items. So what you have to do is actually create a database, and we did that in here. Remember when we downloaded MySQL, and MySQL is basically the technology that you can use to make a database and store all these values in a big table that then you can extract them from. So let's say we want to make a database to keep these items for different users. So let's do that. So we need to first create a new database. So you go to PHP myadmin, and you'll find that in localhost. Once you download the program, you will find it in the localhost. So if you just type in localhost PHP myadmin, you might have to re-sign in. You'll have to sign in with the password and username that you used when you downloaded MySQL, because it's all connected. And this is basically just a way to see the MySQL databases in a better way. So then you just click New, and this is where you create a new database. So here we can create a new database called, this website here is called form.php, so we can call it formdb database. And create, and that's perfect. And then you have to create a table, because a database is just one of the levels of detail that go into it, and you need a better level of detail, which is a table where you actually contain all the values, and you're actually going to search the table when you want to get the values. You're not going to search the database, and each database can have more than one table. So in one database, for example, in this database here for a kind of social media site, this is the whole database, and these are the different tables within the database. So you have a table for the notifications, a table for the users. So the table for the users has all the information about the users, while the table of the posts that these users do have the information about the posts. So every database can have different tables, and each table can have different columns and different rows. So we'll create a table here, and we can call that user info. Number of columns, well, we need we'll create an automatic ID for the user, so that will add one. So automatic ID, username, email, and password, so that then the IDs are listed. So that's going to be 4 columns, so we can say go, and that's perfect. So here then we have to enter the different names of the columns that we're going to be using. And so basically here we're just constructing a table that then the info that the user types in will be put into. So the first one will be called ID, and the type is just the kind of values that you're going to put in. Int is integer, so a number, integer. So we don't want that because the ID is going to be a string, so we call it a varchar. It just means a variable char, and that char just means a character. So it has a length of a variable length of characters. So it's basically just a string. And the length, let's say the max for the ID will be 30. So if somebody tries to put in this database something longer than 30, so if they try to say a string of 40, it will not be put in. The maximum value for this column is going to be 30. So then the default is none, and none of that matters. So the next is going to be username. That's good, and again we don't want integer. So you put varchar. Maybe a username will give a little bit more leeway, so someone could put a longer username in. And then email. Emails can be a bit longer, So this time let's put 50, so if someone has a really long email, and then password, and again we'll put that as of varchar and 50. Okay. Perfect. So now we have this table, and this is the table, the table structure, and still we don't have any values in it, so it's a completely empty table. But we have the different rows. So that's perfect. So now we can use PHP, this section here, to actually put these values in it. So let's say that can work. The first thing you have to do is actually communicate with the database and create a connection. And PHP makes this very, very easy for you. And there are a few different methods. I'll show you I think the best one. It's the most secure one, because obviously it's important to point out that safety for a website is very important if it becomes popular, because especially when a site has input fields, a hacker could put in code in here that can destroy the whole database. So if you have a very important database and he puts a code that says destroy the database, it could come in and do it. But using some special methods, you can avoid that. So this is the best method to do that, and it's called object-oriented MySQL approach. So to do that, first of all, let's link some SQL, some variables. So we say our server name is going to be localhost, because our server is localhost. If it was a site with a domain name, then you would put the actual domain name. Then we need to put the username, and this is the username. When you download MySQL, you'll have to make an account, so with the username and password, and this is the username that you use there. And normally you just put root, so root will automatically use that username. And then you have to put your password. I won't put mine here, but I'll link instead a file, but for you would just put something like password equals your password, like that. But I won't do that, because that's not my password. I'll link this is just calling a different file in which I've saved my password, so just for safety. .php, and that's got saved in it my password, but for you would just make another variable like that. And then you have to put the database name that you just created. So here we created the database called form_db. So we say SQL db name, and we make that equal to form_db. Okay, so now we actually have to create the connection, and the way that you do that is you create a new object. And to create a new object, you have to put new, and then link the object class. And in this case, it's MySQLi, and the I just means improved. It used to be MySQL. It had a lot of different problems, so they decided to improve it, and they added the I to the front of the updated class. So then you just put the different inputs to the function. So you'll put the server name, comma username, and the password. And then the database name. Okay. So now we have the connection, and then we should always check if the connection is working, because then if we write any code underneath it that uses this object here, and it's not, and the connection for some reason didn't work, if you had some setting that was wrong in the PHP ini file or something like that, then it's all going to crash. So before that we get to that point, let's make sure that we're checking if the connection is right. So to do that, you can just do another if statement. Connect error. So this is just checking if there's been any error. If there's been any error, then this function here will return true, meaning that then this if statement will run. If it returns false, then it won't run, and it won't be cancelled. Because here we're going to cancel it. We're going to say die, which means just exit the script now. Don't continue doing anything. And you put action. And you can put, if the user is interested, you could put the reason. And there we go. So here, basically, if there's been any error, it will exit the script and show on the screen this message that says connection failed and then the reason for the failure. Which will just, if the user is interested in what's happening, especially in the local host, when you put it online, you wouldn't maybe display this error here. You would just say, sorry, come back later. But for now, as a developer, it's good to see what errors you're causing. So there we have our connection. Let's just check if it's working. And it is. There are no errors. If it wasn't working, then this message would show up. So this is working perfectly fine. So then what we want to do is put these values into the database. And remember, these values that we have are uname, email, and password. And if the user has put in the value, then it's equal to what he's put in. And if he hasn't put in anything, then it's just equal to nothing. But we want to put anything that he typed into here into the database. So the way you do that is this very clever way called prepared statements. There are many different ways of actually inserting data into a database, but many ways are unsafe and hackers can easily get into it. But this is a pretty new method, which makes it almost impossible for hackers to do this thing called SQL injection, in which they type in code that can destroy a database. So you do this. You make a new variable. So let's call this SQL, just to remember, SQL insert. Okay? And we make that equal to con. Remember that we have con here as the new object. And objects in PHP just mean something that has different functions attached to it. And to reach those functions, you have to do that little arrow sign. So these different functions, a bit like in jQuery as I showed you, as this one here, connect error, it's just seeing if there are any errors, and you get that using the arrow. We do the same here by performing the prepare function. So this is another function to prepare the SQL query. And SQL is actually a very complex language, which I'll talk to you more about it later. And some of the queries that you can make to search enormous databases to filter out small details. For example, the Google search engine, they'll have extremely complicated database queries, and it's a very complicated language. But the simple parts of it are quite simple. So for now, we'll stick to that. So we'll say prepare insert into. And so here we're preparing the query in the language that is SQL. So insert into the table name, I can't remember what it was, user info, into user info. And then the syntax of this command is you put in the different values that are found in user info. So ID, username, email, password. ID, username, email, password. And then you say what values you're going to put. And you're not going to put directly here the values. You're just going to put a question mark. And this is what makes it impossible for hackers to hack. Not impossible, but very, very difficult for hackers to hack, because it uses the values, these variables, as just the content in the variable without any risk of injection. So there you go. So that's the syntax of the SQL. Then we go to the next line, and we want to bind the parameters that we have here to these question marks, because for now these question marks don't represent anything. So to do that, we use this, and this, since it's been called as an object, is going to have functions itself, because you're swapping out con for this variable here. So this represents connection, but just with the name that you can remember. So if you have different inserts and selects and different talkings to the conversations to the database, then you can name them different variables just so you remember them. So here you have to bind the parameters, bind param, and then you specify the types of data. And you remember that we specified what kind they are here, and varchar, varchar, varchar. That means that they're all going to be strings of texts. So we put 4 strings of text represented by S. So those are types. And then after, we have to give what these values are. And I forgot that I put the ID, and the ID we still haven't figured out. And to do the ID, all you have to do is this very, very strong, powerful feature of PHP, that you can create a random string of numbers and letters that is made by the microsecond, or even more precise time, at the server. So it's completely unique, and it's called unique ID. So I can call ID unique ID. And you'll see that these little functions that are pre-made in PHP, like unique ID, will come out in this little green font here, a little bit like is set, which is another function, or if and else. So if you make a misspelling here, it will just be gray. So it's good to know. If it's green, you know that you've typed it correctly. So unique ID, and we can put 2 things there. We don't need to worry about any features. Okay, so now we have the user has a unique ID created when he submits the form. Then we have the username, the email, and the password all ready to go. So here we just need to bind these parameters. So we put ID. We'll put the username, which is called uname. Then the email. And then the password. Let's just check the order. So we have ID, username, email, and password. So that works perfectly. We have all the different numbers. Okay, that's great. Then all we have to do is execute this connection. So we just use this function called execute. And there we have it. If you run this, it's going to put these elements into the database. We'll check it in a second, but before that, we should close the connection. Close this this object here. And then at the end, it's important to close the connection itself. Okay, so let's test that out. So I'll put in Jerry Seinfeld. Email address JS comedy at contact.net, and the password can be comedian. I don't know what else. Submit that, and there we have it. So here we can see that that these are being displayed in from the PHP, but those are just the variables. And let's check in here if it's been updated. And you can see that in user info, all the features of this user have been registered. So we have the unique ID, we have the username, and the email and the password all in one table. So then let's say if I want to make another user. I put Mary, not very original, but Mary.com TV show. Submit. And there you have her row there. And for and this could be a sign up page for a website. So any user that comes along on different computers, they input these things, and on your computer they're going to go into your database right here. And that's perfect because then if they want to retrieve this data, they can, because it's saved in here. Until if they want to delete it, they can delete it. So that works perfectly. That works perfectly. So now what we might want to do is actually try to retrieve this data. So here you know how we have this being posted immediately, right? And the uname being given, and then these values being shown on the page. But we could try now to actually insert it into the database and then retrieve it from the database, and then display it. It's going to result in pretty much the same way, but just to give an example of how we can select data as well. So this is a bit like a login page now, I would say. Or we could even do one better. Let's do one better. Instead of just doing that, let's actually make a little login page. Okay, let's do a little login page here. So I'll copy and paste this code here. So basically this login page, what it's going to do is the user will put in their username, and it will show all of their settings. I mean all the data. So it'll show, they put in their username, and it'll show their email, their password, and their ID. So just for an example of how this can work. So let's save that as login form PHP. Okay, great. So we don't need that. So here we just need one input. And just to vary it a little bit, let's try a get request. Okay, and here we're not creating a username, we're just entering a new one. So enter username, type submit. And they're very right about that. Okay, no errors, that's perfect. So now what we want to happen here is that we already have the values in the database, because let's say these users have already signed up to this website. But now this is the login page. Obviously in a login page you would have the password as well, but just as an example. So we're just going to use a get, but apart from that we should be using pretty much the same way to connect to the database. Let's do that. Great. Let's close the PHP page. Okay, great. So now we just need to receive one value, and that's the uname. Username, and it's a get. So it will be shown in the URL. Let's just see if that works. Username, open up PHP echo uname. So let's put in a username such as Jack. Come on, something different, and it will show it, and it will go into the URL. So this is how, as I showed you before. So this is working perfectly fine. We don't need to see that though. Okay, so now what we want to do is actually select data from the database. So let's say Mary comes to this page here, and she puts in the username Mary, and this website here will return the ID, the email, and the password. And to do that, you have to access the database. So we're already connecting to the database here, so we've already done that. So exactly in the same way, it doesn't matter if what you're doing to the database, you connect to it in the same way. But here, let's create a new connection object. So started with SQL. It's always good to connect with SQL at the beginning, so you remember. And let's call it SQL select this time. The other was insert. And that again equals a version of the con object. And again, you have to prepare a statement. So whether you select or insert, you always prepare a statement. So you prepare, and this time select all, using the little asterisk, from, and the table is called user info. Select all from user info. And that's perfect. Then we just SQL select execute, and then we have to receive the data. And to do that, you have to use bind result. So remember how we used bind param before for the insert, or anything in which you have a question mark, but here we're actually binding the result. So bind result. So we have ID selected. ID selected. We have username selected. Even though the username was just put in, let's just put that again, and then username selected. Then email selected, and then password selected. Password selected. Okay, so basically here we're just returning the result, and it should work fine. And then you need to put the fetch function. And then you can close it. And that just is always good to close the function. It's not completely necessary, but it is always good practice. And before you bind it, it's important that you tell it to store. It can be quite confusing because you have all these things to do with results, but so there you have it. So to select, just a simple select like this, you first prepare the statement, then you execute it, then you store the result in this function here in the PHP, then you bind the results to variables that you specify here. So you make up these variables here. That means that all the info that is taken from the database is attributed each one to these variables, and then fetch just means that these get selected basically, and this is kind of the execute of this function here. And then you close it, and then we close the connection as well. Perfect. So then let's try to display these underneath when you log in. So we can use that little list that we made earlier, a UL. It's slightly different. Let's keep that. And we want to display the ID as well. So I will copy and paste that. ID. And then here you want to echo the ID selected. Here, username selected. Email selected. And password selected. You would never actually take out the password again. That's very, very important, but just for an example. So, whoops, I added an E there. Okay. So, let's see if it works. So, first of all, let's go to the form page. .php. And let's log in as somebody new. So I'll go as Bill, email address, Shakespeare.com, and password Romeo. Okay, submit that. It will show you that that has been selected. Let's see in the database. And there we have it. Perfect. So we have these being put in, and that's perfect. So now let's go to the login page. Okay, and here we need to put our username. I forgot here that we need to put in a where statement. Where username equals. So in fact, we do have to use the bind param function again, because here we're not just selecting everything from the thing. We need to select just where the username is just that. So when somebody puts in Bill, it will just select the information from this database where the username equals Bill and not select everything. So bind param, a string again, and here we have uname again, and this time it's a get, so that's perfect. Uname, and there we have it. So I'll load that again. So here, if I enter Bill, if everything works correctly, it should load everything, and it does. So here it's basically just taking this information. You can see that the ID matches perfectly, the one that ends in 2EE. The username is Bill. It's taking, oh, I misspelled Shakespeare, but it's taking that out, and the password as well. So that's basically how a login page and a sign-up page would work. Not exactly, obviously. This is not exactly what a login page would do, but maybe a profile page in which you have to extract all the information from a profile where the username is that. And this language here, as I say, it's quite complicated. These are very simple queries just to get, you know, a number of data from one row. You should see the functions that they use to scour the whole internet of its websites. They're incredibly complicated algorithms within these searches, but for social media sites and normal websites, this is the kind of stuff that you're going to be dealing with, which is very lucky for us. And it's very, very intuitive, and so it's very good. So I hope now you understand basically the full stack process of a website. These are very simple examples, but as I say, they really represent what a website is about. So next we're going to delve really deep into HTML, because this is really just scraping the surface, and we need to learn everything about it as much as we can, so that we can make some really beautiful websites as well as functional ones. But this is good.